Hello. Our story begins in the middle of a pod race across the barren straits of the Tatooine desert. A minor league race was taking place, and a part of it was an 8.5-year-old Anakin Skywalker. Don't forget the half part. At his age, small things like half a year were important to him, but there were larger focuses despite this. He was using his beautifully crafted pod racer. Instead of carrying colors of blue and yellow, it wore an egregious chrome look, which was blinding to everyone else in the race. Imagine 2 full suns bearing down on you and then reflecting back into your eyes as you tried to pass. It wasn't a polished chrome either, just steel on steel. Anakin had built this racer and he was incredibly proud of it. The racer itself stalled out and he was trailing behind a group of people ahead of him. If he wanted any chance in racing in the Boonta Eve Classic, his skills as a pilot needed to get better. He sped between obstacles as he attempted to keep up with the other racers in the field. They were just too fast for him. He was frustrated, but he was focused. Anakin paced behind everyone as they crossed the finish line. He was disappointed with his inability to pull out a second or third place. He ripped his speeder over to a pit stop where his friends were waiting for him. Kitster and Wald watched their friend pull in and get off his pod racer. The 2 boys congratulated Anakin on getting his racer started. Despite being rightfully upset and frustrated, his friend's joy helped him remember how awesome it was. He could feel the air blasting past his face and his remarkable feeling of actually maneuvering his racer down the field. Anakin and his friends quickly jumped into the conversation about the race he had just participated in. The adults that survived the race weren't as happy. Most of them were banking on this minor league race so they could get their name into an actual race so they could afford to live. It perhaps was one benefit Anakin and Shmi had as slaves at a hovel. They didn't necessarily have to pay to survive. An odd way to look at a disgusting predicament, but having a positive mindset was the only way for them to survive the ordeal. As Anakin and the other 2 boys were chatting about his experience, they heard a commotion from the stands behind them. When they looked up, they saw a man with a large circular hat. He was a Duros, with tubes coming out of his face, and he stood up with quick intensity. There were 2 men bugging him and he told them to back off. The bounty hunter wasn't left alone, so he clobbered one of the men in the throat and shot the other point blank in the eye. The other guy choked on the ground before Bane pulled his blaster around and fired it through the back of his neck. His eyes scanned the 2 individuals that were dead and then the rest of the stands before noticing the 3 children watching him. He turned back to everyone else and asked if anyone else had any intention to start bugging him again. Not a response was heard, so he planted his pistol back into its holster. He stepped down from the stands and looked to Skywalker and asked how he learned to be a pilot. Anakin stumbled over his words, but the answer was no one taught him. Yeah, that made sense. His performance was pretty underwhelming. Anakin made a reactive face as Bane sauntered away from them. Cad was very annoyed, and while he meant what he said to Skywalker, he didn't really care as much as he did to say what he did. In a normal scenario, he wouldn't have commented, but those guys pissed him off by coming at him like that. The bounty hunter loved watching the minor leagues because there were hidden gems that didn't show up in the pros. What Cad especially liked were the erratic players, because in the major leagues, especially pod racing, there were pros that wouldn't do stupid things. But in this particular league, there were racers who would literally kill themselves and a number of other racers because they thought it'd be funny. There was no rhyme or reason for some of their decisions, and it's why Bane loved to watch it. Because the erratic behavior wasn't commonplace in the pros. He had to admit he was surprised to see Anakin in the lineup, but his performance was mediocre at best. He didn't finish last because the people who did died, but he wasn't anywhere near the front either. Cad stormed towards a shuttle and it took him back to town where he waited impatiently. When he got back, he went to a local cantina and got a drink, or 2, or maybe 3. Unbeknownst to him, Anakin, Kitster, and Wald would enter the same establishment in the following hour. The pod racer was returned to the hovel and the kids rushed in so they could pretend to be adults. They were mostly just hanging out and joking around. Because they weren't a bother to the owner of the cantina, he gave them a free shareable and a couple drinks. There were plenty of kids around the area that would steal from him or force customers out by being annoying, so he rewarded kids who didn't act like hooligans. Anakin, Kitster, and Wald were good kids in his mind. These little rewards were extra incentives for them to become long-time customers when they grew up. Regardless, Cad, who was sat at the bar, looked through his hologram. On it were several bounties that were for the taking. He had just returned from a mission to Nimbon, where he assassinated a political figure and delivered their family to a rival from the system of Slaharan. It's why he was on a break at the League event out by the Barren Straits. Cad had a great reputation with the Hutts, so he was scanning through some of their contract work because he typically got first dibs on whatever he wanted. While he was sitting there, he happened to see the same kids from before out of the corner of his eye. He looked over with a very frustrated expression, recognizing them, but noticing they didn't seem to care that he was here. Must have been nothing. But it was a weird coincidence, surely. The reality is, especially now that he had a couple drinks to mellow him out, there was genuine potential for the boy he saw racing the Chrome Racer. He was young, human, and compelling. He didn't finish in the top 5, but that was still pretty remarkable for someone listed as 8 years old. There was value in that kind of skill, and one of the things his mentor, Jango Fett, had told him was to build a crew. Jango flew solo, but he also didn't like having a crew. He proposed that Bane find himself one, especially because he had recently gotten involved with a Sith Lord named Maul on Corellia. After all, that's why he had his oxygen tubes installed. He hated Force users and had no need to allow one of them an upper hand against him. Maul used a Force choke on someone, and it inspired Cad to be wary of these mystical powers. So, he thought about what kind of value an inexpensive pilot would have for him. If he truly wanted to start a crew, then he wouldn't start by purchasing work from already established names. He needed people who could earn their cut, work for him, and then find their own path outwards. Cad understood, as a known name in the bounty hunting game, there were 2 realities. The first being that other hunters would want to have him killed, because his death would further accelerate their careers, especially without his competition. The second being that individuals who could swear loyalty would be willing to serve under him, and as he trained these individuals, they would become future allies. The bounty hunting world wasn't a place for friendships to blossom or fluffy feelings to prosper. It was a galaxy where alliances eclipsed doing something from the kindness of their heart. Bane didn't care about the other kids. He was only interested in the pod racer, because at his age he could be convinced to learn the bounty hunting way. He could be taught, and if he could learn, then he would become a useful asset. Whether or not Skywalker liked Cad didn't matter. He could have an efficient pilot under his wing for the next couple of years, a decade at most. One thing remained especially true though. Cad Bane could not teach this individual, or any individual for that matter, everything. He needed to ensure he remained the top gunslinger in the galaxy, and there was one other individual who was better than him. But Jango was an ally, and there shouldn't be any rivalries to grow between the two of them. Bane picked the cup off the counter and dumped it into his mouth, before slamming it rim down at the same location. The bartender looked at him, and a couple credits were spread out across the bar, as Cad stood up and turned around. Anakin, Kitster, and Wald were still unaware that the Duros man they saw earlier was in the same bar. Cad was a little tipsy, and he flipped his hat over his head as he walked over towards the table. When he reached it, he planted his fist into it, and pointed at Skywalker, asking him if he wanted to be a pilot someday. Anakin looked at the other boys, hoping that this would be their chance to join a professional crew for pod racing. This could be their chance to sign with a racer and become an understudy. Who knows? Maybe he'd be working with Jabba or something like that. And sure, Anakin hated the Hutts, but still, there were silver linings in things, especially this, and especially as a slave. Anakin's chest heaved with excitement as he put his own drink down and nodded. Bane told him to take a walk with him. Anakin refused. He was a Tatooine kid. He had enough street smarts to not just go along with any stranger, especially with one with the skills of this Duro. So, Bane sighed in almost annoyance, telling the kid that he was trying to start a crew, and he was looking for a pilot. Anakin got a little upset, as this was said to him. This wasn't a pod racing crew type of thing, and he didn't want to work with Bane. He told the bounty hunter that his dream was to be a pod racer, not a scum like himself. Cad looked at the children and scoffed, telling him that he was missing out. He noticed that they were slaves earlier in the day. Anakin could have just bought himself some freedom. Despite Cad believing that this gaslighting would work, it actually made Anakin more resentful as he told Cad that he wouldn't be leaving his mother or his friends. Bane shrugged and scoffed under his breath that Anakin was missing out on an opportunity of a lifetime. He stormed out of the cantina and left for his own personal ship. Anakin and the other boys would return to the hovel before sunset and talk about their weird experience inside the bar. It was odd, was it not? They all thought so. But it became a blip in their day, because aside from that, it was an awesome day. Anakin raced his first race with actual racing, and they got to spend the day away from their duties to their owners. The cantina owner was always kind to them, so it didn't really matter. They got what they wanted out of it, and had a day for themselves. Cad Bane, on the other hand, was having a lot less of a fun time. He was trying to enjoy his day when he got jumped at the race. He expected the kid to join him because typically anyone with that type of skill would see their own value, but nope. He was left with a really bland day, and now, without seeing any real positives coming from this day, he abandoned Tatooine. He picked up some mission on Arame, and he would really loathe Anakin for not joining his crew. When he went on the mission, he got the most credits available from any other job on the market at the time, but the mission itself nearly got him killed. It was one of those times when you really need a pilot to escape an unfavorable situation. Cad Bane was not thrilled at all with how everything turned out on this specific mission. So he finished it, returned the head of the perpetrator to Jabba's throne, and left straight for Mos Espa. While Cad Bane knew well enough that there were millions of pilots in the galaxy, people that would work for cheap or even for free, he wanted to work with this kid. Firstly, he didn't think someone of Anakin's stature would be willing to kill him. He was a quote-unquote good kid, and Bane's conversation inside the cantina told him everything he needed to know about the boy. Working with him wouldn't be difficult because he would listen and do what he needed to do. He was not a born killer. Anakin was a nice kid, with a little edge, but he wouldn't try and kill Cad, because Anakin was a survivor. Worry about payments? Not a thing to consider. In Cad's mind, he could purchase this slave, never have to pay a dime more aside from maybe food, and from there he would profit off the cheap labor Anakin had to offer. If he resented Cad for pulling him away from his mother, then so be it. Kids gotta toughen up, because this galaxy didn't give handouts to special pilots. This was Anakin's chance, and one day he would thank him for it. Hopefully, not in his sleep. He tracked down the boy and eventually found Watto's shop. The boy was left out early, and told to go play, because he had cleaned all the racks and was pretty much set to go. Anakin yippied away to the hovel, and once he left, Cad walked into the shop and questioned the Toydarian how much he would sell Anakin for. Watto threw out a number like 10,000. Cad saw exactly what Watto saw, the potential, so of course he wouldn't be willing to give up his slave. Bane came up with a different method to combat his stubbornness. He told Watto that he could spare his life, and he could take his slave for 2,300 max. Watto snarled, telling Cad that he wouldn't dare. Bane pulled his pistol out and planted it right on Watto's fat blue head, and asked him to dare him. How about he double dare him? Watto hesitated and became very fearful, as indicated by the rapid flapping of his wings. Cad pushed Watto into the wall and told him to tell the boy where to meet him on the following shift. If he didn't comply, then he would have his neck slit, and he'd be hung over his shop like a bad omen. Watto scoffed as Bane walked away, tipping his hat lower towards his head, as he slipped out of the shop, dropping a bag of 2,300 credits on the ground as he did. The following morning, Anakin would come to work and get everything going. Though there was something odd going on. There were guards from a local gang staking out the shop. They told Anakin that he was safe, because they were simply guarding the shop. He knew better than to ask any other questions, so he went along and started opening the racks and preparing the interior of the shop for the actual opening of the store. Anakin would also go into the back courtyard where he would turn on a couple of the service droids and put them to work. By the time he returned, Watto was floating in. The Toydarian man told Anakin that there was a commotion the previous night. Just as he started speaking, blasters started ringing out. Watto told Anakin to run, but as Anakin slipped towards the entrance to the courtyard, Cad dropped down the roof and pulled Anakin out of the way, and shoved him against the wall, telling him to stay down. He fired his pistols at the incoming gang members. Watto tried to get out of the way, which he was fortunate enough to do, but his wing was clipped. Cad lobbed a thermal imploder into the room and it ripped through the gang members, leaving them in a terrible rubble. Cad shoved Anakin towards the debris and told him to stay close. They would be in imminent danger. His owner was going to have him killed for racing. Watto was hidden safely behind a counter, but the bag of 2,300 credits was on top of it. They were shredded, but Bane grabbed the scalding hot credits and dumped them into the exterior of his pocket, whatever wasn't melted or destroyed. The moment they abandoned the shop, they were fired upon again. Cad told Anakin where to run. His mother would be safe, but they wouldn't be until they got out of the city. Blaster fire erupted across the streets, as people all too familiar with these sounds ducked in cover or continued doing what they were doing. A couple people eating on the outskirts of a deli or two just watched in amusement. Bane was the perfect shot, and these gang members were wildly unprepared for who they were squaring off against. Cad didn't duck much, but he just poured a steady array of fire down the corridor of the street, and the gang members kept dropping. Eventually, Cad shoved Anakin into a hangar bay and told him to get into the ship and start the engines. Anakin looked at him with confusion, and Cad deepened his voice and got more vocal, telling Anakin that if he wanted to die, he could sit here and watch, or he could get in the damn ship and get the engines on, so that they could leave unscathed. Anakin nodded and rushed off. The expression in his eyes were awestruck and confused. It was his first blaster fight and escape, so Bane couldn't blame him, but it was time all of that changed. He stepped back as more of the gang piled in. They continued getting dropped, not even a chance, and also Bane had pinned them in a trap. It was a small door and it was a one exit, one entrance type of hangar, so they were stuck in a chokehold. He eventually got into the starship and Skywalker shakily lifted off. By the time they were out of the hangar, Cad was behind Anakin with a hand on his seat and telling the boy exactly what to do. The ship pulled out of the city and flew towards the skyline, but they wouldn't be pursued. This little excitement gave Cad the chance to explain everything he needed to Anakin. Flying was a little different than using a pod racer. Same principle, just more going on. Now that Anakin was a bit more understanding of the vessel, they could take a moment to digest everything. The piece of junk Cad flew was no Slave One, but it did do the job. As they settled over Tatooine in orbit, Anakin took in the sight. It was beautiful and tragic all at once. He had always dreamed of getting off the planet, and now here he was, orbiting it, with his mother still trapped in slavery. Apparently, he needed to include more depth to his wishes. As he looked at the planet beneath them, Cad reintroduced himself and apologized for the unnecessary combat this morning. He didn't mean anything by it. Anakin turned around and asked what it was all about, and why he was the one bailing him out. Bane sighed, and told Anakin that he had just returned from a mission to Aramie, and he was trying out another local cantina, similar to the one where he ran into him at. What Cad learned was that there were some thugs hired by Watto to basically trap Anakin and take him away. It was an elaborate scheme, because slavers would get paid benefits from the Hutts if their slaves were damaged, killed, or stolen. Think of it as insurance with property, and Watto was trying to perform insurance fraud with the Hutts. Cad expressed that they were interested in Skywalker because he was a pilot, and they wanted to adopt him into their gang or something, so it'd be a win-win for both parties. Being that Bane understood how important it was for Anakin to continue being a pilot, he took him out of the situation. For the time being, they'd have to work together so they could get back to Tatooine to free his mother. Anakin got a little worried though. What would happen to his mother? Cad had a response ready, explaining that she'd be safe. The Toydarian had very little interest in her. She would continue to serve, but there wasn't nearly as much profit for her as there was for Anakin. Being that Skywalker was young, he could be developed into a useful asset for these people, which is why the fraud would be so beneficial for Watto. He could probably buy 1 or 2 more slaves off the benefits. Anakin asked why they couldn't go back down this instant and free his mother. Cad told him that the Hutts would have their crews all over the establishment, the hovel, and pretty much wherever Anakin frequented. Watto would have to talk his way out of it, and if he could manage to, then the Hutts would put extra security up around his location and around his slaves, to make sure this type of thing never occurred again. Anakin thought that the situation was a little fishy, because he couldn't tell if Cad was pulling his leg or not. It didn't seem totally viable. Like, why would the Hutts protect someone if they were caught committing fraud? Essentially, Bane explained that if Watto talked his way out of it, then the Hutts would assume that this was an external matter. Therefore, they would protect their assets, because in this system, Watto was a slave owner, and technically a slave himself. Therefore, his value was equatable to any regular slave in the eyes of the Hutts. Anakin balled his fists, and Bane smiled to himself. All of this went to say that there was no scam. Bane told the truth to Anakin from a certain point of view. The only difference was the roles were reversed, and there was no fraud, no scam. It was a simple case of making sure Cad got what he wanted while sounding like a hero, and it worked like a charm, because Anakin told Cad that he would do everything he needed to do so that they could save his mother from Watto. Cad patted Anakin on the shoulder and agreed. Bane would have an awkward conversation about how he worked for the Hutts, but until that time came, in a couple weeks, he would focus on piloting, because after all, that's what the boy wanted to do. He was simply taking advantage of the limited brain power of an 8-year-old. Oh look, a shiny thing over here. Don't let that distract you from this very challenging thing over there. That also worked like a charm, because despite the challenge of the situation, Anakin was able to enjoy the actual aspect of being a pilot. Before they left Tatooine space, they'd practice some maneuvers. Some would have Bane impressed, others would have him irritated, and the rest would leave him sick to his stomach. Anakin wanted to go fast, which was a great case, but spinning was a very nauseating trick, especially when it was done repetitively for 4 or 5 minutes. However, their escapade of training over Tatooine ended with the beginning of a new mission. It was actually really pretty simple. It was a pick up and drop off for a pirate lord working on the Narcaga system. They'd fly into Hutt space at the system of Val. Bane would go in, kill who he needed to, and Anakin would be ready for a shaky pickup. But it would work favorably for the duo. Cad was able to get in and out unscathed, and due to Skywalker piloting, they were well away from the pirate's base before the interceptors could catch the bounty hunters. Bane welcomed Anakin to this way of life, something Anakin himself wasn't sure if he wanted to be fond of or not, but right now, in this moment, he was grateful for the excitement, though there was something else. Kitster and Wald would not be freed. Cad was only picking people with potential, not fans of a decent pilot. From now on, the journey would be between infamous bounty hunter Cad Bane and former slave pod racer Anakin Skywalker. By his mid-teens, Anakin was working as a full-time pilot with Cad Bane, but at this current moment he was sneaking away from the crew lead and the other 2 grunts working with them. Anakin was creeping around Mos Espa as a 15-year-old, and he snuck into Watto's home. The young bounty hunter was a trained killer, but more specifically an expert pilot. He slipped in the window of the top floor of Watto's apartment, and found the Toydarian slave owner fast asleep in his bed. Anakin's blood boiled. Hate spilled out of him as he wrapped his hand over Watto's mouth and nose, and sealed both shut. The man woke in terror, squirming rapidly as his life was being taken out of him by a grown version of the slave he had lost. Anakin started wailing on Watto, slamming his fist into his body with each passing hit, until he ripped a dagger from his belt and held it against Watto's face, but doing it in a toying way. He told Watto that the last thing he would ever see in his pathetic life was the face of his former slave. Watto let out grunts and tried to scream for help until the dagger was plunged into him. It didn't stop there. It was again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Anakin couldn't pull himself to stop until he fell backwards in an exhausted state. He quickly cleaned what little of his clothes and skin he could. Luckily, he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, making it an easy process before dipping out of the abode. Shmi had been kept from ever being freed by Cliegg Lars, because Watto was able to get a cash bonus from the Hutts, and he brought in 3 extra slaves and moved everyone to a new part of town. Anakin followed the trail there and got his mother out, pushing her towards the starport and telling her he didn't have much time to explain anything. She could see remnants of the blood on his skin and clothes, but she couldn't ask questions as they ran through the streets. When they eventually did get to the port, he embraced her with a massive hug, telling her that he loved her with all of his heart, but she needed to go now. Shmi could see the wear and tear on her son's face. He had a scar over his eye, he had a couple bruises on his skin, there was a patch over his collarbone, and his eyes were tired. She had seen the same expression in herself over the years, and told Anakin to stop whatever path he was on. It was tearing him apart, even if he couldn't see it. The worst part is, he knew, but he didn't have time to tell her that. Anakin handed her a ticket, and a handful of credits. He had been saving everything since his first mission with Cad. This was her chance to get her freedom. It was a ticket to the mid-rim world of Mapuzo. It was both a mining world and a farming world. At the current moment, the surface of the planet was gorgeous, arrays of green never seen on Tatooine. He told her that he had seen it, and he knew she would find home and peace there. It was far removed from the huts and it was within Republic territory. He promised her that he would come back for her and find her. Shmi stopped as he pushed her towards the queue which was loading into the vessel. She told Anakin to find his heart, to find his home, and to save himself before he ever came for her. Shmi told him that she loved him and was very appreciative for his kindness and his love, but she cared more about his own health. She held his hand and made him promise that he would choose himself, and he did. In minutes, mother and son would be separated again. This time, for how long, that was also left unknown. It was time to return to his crew, and of course, the leader of the group, Cad Bane. At this point, the crew had grown very little. There was the sharpshooter, the up-and-coming marksman of Conquer Dawn, named Raiko Hardin. Jango Fett actually suggested that Cad bring him into the group, which he did. The last member included had a little bit more of a recognizable name. He was the demolisher from Corellia, named Dengar. The four of them got along well, as the crew should, but Anakin was the youngest, and he was treated like it. This didn't mean he was disrespected, because everyone recognized his importance as their pilot. They just picked on him frequently, and these were mostly jokes. A couple got Anakin to laugh, but that happened very rarely. Anakin himself didn't mind the new members, but they also had to upgrade to a larger ship, which was an ST-70 assault ship. Anakin, despite its slower speed, preferred this vessel, because he could lock the cabin, lay the pilot's seat out, and use it as a bed. It wasn't the most comfortable thing in the galaxy, but it was far better than the former vessel. Anakin, despite not minding the new guys, had a very deep love and hate relationship with Cad Bane. He still believed the story he was told, and that was all fine and dandy in his eyes, but Bane was such a pain to work with. Like some days, he was nice to be around, even somewhat fun, but other times he pissed Anakin the criff off. He would specifically get under your skin to get a rise out of you. But what made it worse is that he didn't even laugh about it. Dengar and Raiko, absolutely. They'd rustle you up and get a good laugh. Which sure, laughing is contagious, but Cad was such a piece of work. And while Anakin hated a lot of who Cad was, if it weren't for him, he wouldn't have all these skills. Anakin professionally traveled the stars. He was a gunslinger. Not as good as Cad at all, but still a gunslinger. He could banter with the best of them, which he usually didn't. And of course, he was one of the names passed around the underworld for being such a great pilot. He knew how to help people with his skills, and he often tried to be a good person, despite his profession as a bounty hunter. The starship Anakin returned to was called Oida's Revenge. It was based off a pirate queen they killed at Rathana, after getting the ship in their possession. Dengar thought it was a trip, and they kept the name because it rolled off the tongue easily. But Anakin was shoved against the wall by Cad upon his return. Bane snarled in Anakin's face and demanded to know where he went. Skywalker wasn't fazed by this. He'd been through this kind of treatment for years, and he was grateful that he hit his growth spurt early, because Cad was looking up at him just a little. It made it kind of funny in his mind. But he told Bane that he was saving his mother because he was tired of waiting around for Cad to do it. Dengar actually liked this move, and Raiko was snoozing with his head at a 90-degree angle, so he didn't care or hear. Anakin looked at Cad dead in the eyes, and told him to let it go. It was over and done with. Cad shoved Anakin back again, and he fought back, but was tossed over Bane's shoulder as he planted his boot on Anakin's neck. He told the boy he had much to learn before he could ever dream of fighting back. Cad lowered himself down and told Anakin that if he wanted to go out and do it, the next time, just say so. They were a crew, no need to be working behind anyone's back. Bane removed his boot and helped Anakin off the ground and told him to get some rest. They had an important heist coming up. Anakin twisted his shoulder and stormed towards the cockpit. When he was out of earshot, Dengar told Cad that he could go easier on the kid. He was doing the right thing for his blood, and Cad snapped Dengar out of it, reminding him that this was a kill or be killed galaxy. Having such a soft spot would get him killed. If it didn't, then he was one lucky bastard. Anakin could resent him for it for now, but it might just save his life someday. Inside the cockpit, Anakin slammed down into the seat and sighed heavily. Why did he have to be stuck here, in this predicament? His mother was right. He hated being here, and he hated what being a bounty hunter did to him. Anakin wasn't directly involved with most bounties, but he watched helpless people from around the galaxy get dragged away from their homes kicking and screaming, and he did nothing to help or stop it. He did help when he could, but he was tired. His brain was screaming for help, and he was looking for an outlet, somewhere to go, but he was trapped. Anakin's identity revolved around this crew, and Oida's revenge. Bane had even said to him when he was 9 or 10 years old that if he ever tried to break free, then he would never find a name for himself. He was very adamant that he could destroy Anakin's life without putting a finger on him. It was basically slavery, but he got a very small percent of the cut, because he was the pilot and/or driver. In the morning, Anakin was awoken and told to pilot the ship, so he listened. The ship lifted off and out of a hangar bay in Mos Espa. They were here doing a job for Jabba and they had finished it. The new mission was even more exciting in Cad's mind. He told Skywalker and the rest of the crew what they were doing, and where they were going. They were traveling deep into the core to take out a personal rival of Jabba's, and they were going to start a divide. Their target location was Kodia, at the headquarters of the Trade Federation. As per the report, Gunray was the last in a long line of viceroys of the Trade Federation that continued to screw over the Hutts. It was a long cold war between trade routes, supplies, racketeering, gambling, and military movements. The Federation had a much larger military than the Hutts, so Jabba couldn't do anything drastic. But at this current point, according to spies, there were tensions between the major businesses in the galaxy. So in Jabba's mind, he could put a hit out on Gunray, with a highly trusted crew, and get them to stoke the flames of a Federation's downfall. Being that tensions were rising within the core as it was, under Palpatine's leadership, it was about time someone did something drastic. With a chance to finally make the Federation atone for their treatment of the Hutt crime family, Jabba was ready to make a move. With everything in place, Oida's revenge darted into hyperspace, towards the core world of Kodia. There wasn't much said during their trip through hyperspace. They all knew what they were likely going to face. There was a reason Jabba sent a group of highly skilled bounty hunters into territory like this. It was the same reason they were acting so quickly. This type of opportunity didn't come often, and for the people of the underworld, they had to pick their forbidden fruit as soon as they could, before it went bad. When they arrived, they sailed down through the clouds and over the floating platforms of the cities on the planet. The starship sailed down below a platform and landed on a natural rock formation outside the city. Anakin was joining them for this mission, because Cad believed they would need gunners more than pilots. The Federation had thousands of battle droids, as were displayed at Naboo 5 or 6 years before. Skywalker followed the crew into the main tower of the Federation headquarters. They used a series of tunnels to reach it, and they climbed up through them into a ventilation shaft. Due to the Jedi sneaking around the Lucrehulk during the Naboo crisis, the Trade Federation decided to change their ventilation systems, and it started at their headquarters. So instead of slyly sneaking around, the vents alerted the battle droids within the facility, and the entire building was shut down. As a result, no one inside the vents knew this. All they knew was that they had to get to the top of the building. As they continued to ascend the tower, it slowly became more and more obvious that something had gone awry, and it was very clearly the rise of battle droid movements. With B2 variants inside the facilities, along with numerous B1 types, it was very clear that they had triggered something, and these droids were trailing them. Cad picked up on it first and decided that Reiko would cause a distraction and then go back into the vents, while the other three moved through the corridors on foot. They'd meet Reiko on the 43rd floor, and from there make a heroic escape. Gunray's office was on the 45th, and they were all currently on the 31st. Reiko lobbed an array of detonators, and they exploded, sending various battle droids off in the different locations. Anakin, Cad, and Dengar jumped out into the smoke and fired into each of the 3 directions, before Cad led them forward. Their blasters rang out until they got into the clear. The entire headquarters, as a result, shut down. Halls started to lock, and Newt Gunray, who was avoiding yet another trial with the courts, was protected in his office by destroyer droids. Gunray at the current moment was dealing with his own predicament. Tyrannus of the forming Confederacy wanted a military. He had gained the support of another conglomerate, and was trying to get the Commerce Guild, Techno-Union, Trade Federation, and banking clans to come to an agreement. It's why there was tension between the conglomerates. They had to compromise to make the separatist movement work, but the Federation and Union were especially greedy, creating unnecessary tension for everyone else. Gunray was at the center of the problem, and he recently broke apart a board meeting between these major players, and Tyrannus openly, as another major player in the call responded with some hostility following Gunray's disruption. Several stories below Gunray, 3 bounty hunters were stuck in gridlock. They had ascended a couple flights of stairs, but super battle droids clogged the stairwell. So they were going to use an alternative means to get up to the 45th floor. Blowing up holes in the ceilings, and then climbing was one of those methods. It just became more difficult because they had to actively avoid battle droids as they searched for new holes to blow up. Though this method started to work really well for them, it was just brutal on the upper body. Cad continued to shred through battle droids, with Dengar's heavy rifle doing an insane amount of damage covering him. Anakin was being regulated to finding places to break open in the ceiling, which wasn't nearly as fun. His resentment during this mission was at an all-time high, but he had to get them through the floors and up to the next levels. By the time they got to the 45th floor, a firefight was already taking place. Blaster fire was everywhere, and Reiko was laughing like a maniac somewhere in the smoke. The head of Gunray had been removed, and the battle droids protecting him were going nuts. Like a Wookiee on death sticks, they were destroying everything in sight. Dengar charged in, lobbing his remaining explosives across the chambers, and ducking in the cover as they ripped open battle droids. Cad and Anakin stood side by side, firing their pistols at the hulking droids. With the skirmish dragging on, more enemies entered the fray. Anakin, being the last one in, had to adapt. He slid towards the droids and shanked one of them with his dagger, the one that killed Watto, and used the droid for cover as he fired at the new enemies approaching. Cad, Reiko, and Dengar were on the other side of the room, confirming their kill and packaging up the head of Gunray, so that they could give it to Jabba on his throne. The package would ensure that the head didn't decompose. They looked over the desk they were hiding behind to see Anakin throwing the droids to the side and ducking out of the way as he fired from his back on the ground into the face of a super battle droid towering over him. Dengar got up and moved away from Anakin, firing into the back of the massive weapon. Cad asked Reiko for the escape plan, and he pointed towards the window. 4 extensions were tied into the ceiling, and they'd have to rappel down, going down 2 flights and then getting into a new set and going down from them. Luckily, they should be able to descend without losing cable room. Cad told Reiko to go, as he pushed him towards the window and started firing at the droids surrounding Anakin. He called the kid and told him to get over now, as Anakin watched Reiko with a box jump out of the window. Skywalker scrambled to his feet and rushed over, where Cad pushed him out, and told him that this time he'd be the last one out. Anakin smiled in an appreciative way, before attaching himself to a cable and descending behind Reiko. Dengar and Cad followed out, rappelling down the side of the building and moving diagonally so the droids couldn't directly hit them. Because it took the other 3 so long to get up here, Reiko was able to set up the perfect escape route, before he got tired of being patient and took out Gunray himself. The bounty hunters, when they got around the 5th floor, allowed themselves across the skyline onto an adjacent building, where they ran away from blaster fire that continued to chase them from a different floor. They didn't need to fire back, their mission was complete. Anakin took point as they got themselves down into the city streets. This wasn't a choice, but they ran out of building to run on. Their troubles weren't finished yet. As they ran quickly down the city streets, an AAT tank surprised them by hovering around a corner and unloading a shell into their direction. Reiko was launched from his feet into the window of a shop. Dengar was thrown in the Bane, and Anakin stopped in his tracks to fire back at the tank. Its armor had no issue defending these shots, as it fired another burst. It exploded behind Anakin, nearly killing Dengar and Bane as it missed and clobbered a street lamp. Anakin helped Reiko out of the glass and pushed him forward. Skywalker turned on a heel and ran behind the other bounty hunters. Just as they dipped around another street corner, they found another tank following them. Dengar was out of explosives, so they had to keep going. Anakin called for Reiko to fire down one of their cannons. He listened, tossing the head of Gunray to Cad, who caught it. Anakin turned around and spotted the shot for the enclosing tank. It prepared to fire, but before it did, it detonated and ripped through the support structure of a building next to it and dragged it down on top of another chasing tank. The bounty hunters continued to run away, chased by battle droids and various new troop types for the coming CIS military. The one Gunray didn't want to join, but wanted to take money off of. The hunters quickly entered the gates of Awita's Revenge, and Anakin scrambled up the ladder and lifted off. They weren't done yet, as he sped away from the numerous vulture droids, released from the hidden hangar bay under the city. Anakin sped the ship as fast as he could, calling for Cad to get to the cannons, which he did. The heavy ship flipped on its side as Anakin dipped down into a canyon. The vulture droids slammed into the walls as they pursued. In the bay of the ship, Dengar and Reiko were thrown from side to side, trying to strap themselves in. Anakin tried spinning before lifting out of the canyon upside down. The Vulture droids followed, some crashing into one another, others getting shot out of the sky by Cad Bane. Skywalker shoved a throttle in, and the ship pushed itself through the clouds over the sky, before it dipped down into the clouds themselves. Another wave of Vultures, moving at a much faster rate, sped by the cloud where Anakin hid within, before he dipped out of the cloud and followed from above the squad of fighters. His hand smashed the trigger, as did Cad's, as they unloaded everything the Oida's Revenge had on the Vulture droids. They were blasted out of the sky, and Anakin was able to pilot the ship out of the atmosphere and into hyperspace, before Federation frigates could intercept them. A lot had happened in the last day, but this mission, and his message from his mother before she left for Mapuzo, made Anakin vow to himself that he would change. This mission was ironically one of their better missions. In other words, he was treated like a part of the crew, rather than the getaway driver. But it made him realize how lowly he had been treated. He had longed for an escape. Cad patted him on the shoulder and slapped his hand against Anakin's after they escaped. That's honestly what kept him here for so long, the camaraderie. Every time he wanted to escape, he'd do something that Bane praised him for, like he was his own child. Maybe that's what it was. Anakin longed for some kind of father figure, and his two examples were Cad Bane and Watto, and maybe the cantina owner who used to get him free food. By the time they reached Tatooine, they were praised and paid well, but Jabba was in a very, very good mood. Aside from Gunray becoming a trophy in his throne room, there was an explosion. The death of Newt Gunray triggered a response from the Federation. They had no reason to assume the Hutts would be involved, because Jabba had kept such a low-key demeanor towards everything the Federation did for so long. Hell, the Hutt Council didn't even know their patriarch went ahead with this mission, so they were just as surprised of Newt Gunray's death. But Jabba informed the crew of Oida's Revenge that before they could get comfortable, gamble, and get some drinks, they had a much more profitable mission ahead of them. One that would be the score of the century. And that, my friends, is part 1 of the story. Again, special thanks to the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Smoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Alexandra Reese the Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pyramark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Anakin Stank Runner, CT75 67, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jenny Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Catlick, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Mary 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. Or supporting the channel, smash that like button. Sith Clone Wars on Saturday. I'm trying out parted episodes again, so let me know what you think of this kind of approach to the stories. If you guys really like this format, this might become more constant, but we'll see. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.